Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us for Tips and Tools for Engaging Youth. We have Michelle Martin here with us today as part of our webinar series, and she's going to provide some amazing resources through a blog for you, and then some follow-up Try It Tuesday emails that you'll be getting, all on engaging young people. We know that retention can be a problem for all of our programs, and the perspective we're taking in this webinar is that youth vote with their feet. And we want to be really clear that if you're having trouble with retention, there's a lot of things you can probably do to shift your program design, whether it's your environment, whether it's your the activities you're doing with young people, or some staff training that can really support making things more interesting for young people and making young people want to stay and want to get something out of your program. So Michelle's going to take it away and share what she's come up with, and also let you know how you can share questions so we can make this a real interactive session today. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Jen. And I'm going to start with the screen sharing, so give me a second so we can get to the slides. And as Jen said, this is Tips and Tools for Engaging Youth. And we wanted to let you know, first of all, how you can ask questions during the webinar. If you're watching this from the YouTube page and you have a YouTube account, then you can log into your account and you can actually ask questions through the comments feature on the YouTube page. Your other option, if you have questions, is to email them to Jen, and her email address is jenbrevoort, JENBREVOORT @gmail.com. And she'll be kind of monitoring all of the questions and letting me know when we have questions, and will get that information to me. So either through the YouTube page or by emailing Jen at that email address. So let me give you a quick intro. Some of you may already know me, some of you may not. I am a career development facilitator instructor and have been working in career and workforce development for almost 20 years now. I've done a lot of work in the youth workforce development and youth development fields, done some work with Philadelphia Youth Network. When Pennsylvania had their regional career education partnerships, I managed that for Delaware County, and then I also was a facilitator or a provider of services of technical assistance to the other RCEPs. I've done work for Job Corps. I also run a youth leadership academy in Delaware County that's sponsored by the Delaware County Chamber of Commerce Foundation. So lots of different experiences in working with young people, and a lot of what we're going to be talking about today it has kind of grown from those experiences, as well as some other experiences and research I've done. We wanted to let you know that this webinar series is really kicking off a couple of things. We're creating a Tips and Tools for Engaging Youth website that you'll be able to access at engagepyn.blogspot.com. It's a blog, and we'll be adding to that blog over the next 10 weeks. And the big way that we'll be adding to it is we're going to be doing more Try It Tuesdays. I'll talk more about those at the end of the webinar, but really what we wanted to do was use this as an opportunity to kind of kick off some of our thinking and some of the things that we'll be sharing with you guys over the course of the summer. So here's our agenda for today. The first thing I want to talk about is what really motivates people. We have some ideas about what motivation is about, how do we engage with people, and what I want to share with you is some research and some information that might get us thinking a little differently about how to go about motivating young people. We're also going to talk about how to engage through body, mind, and what I'm calling heart, and there we mean emotions. Because really, when we're working with anyone, not just young people, but anyone, we're more likely to get change and growth and everything else when all three of those components, we're engaging with body, mind, and heart. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Then I'm going to talk about some structures that are engaging, and I'll explain more about what I mean by structures. But we're essentially looking at what are ways that you can set things up that tend to be more engaging. And then we're also going to talk about some different events and activities that engage. And some of these events and activities are things that you may have heard of, some you may not have heard of. And there are some different ways to start thinking about how we can work with young people. So I want to start us off with an idea, and that is my experience has been that when we ask, how do I engage my students, how do I engage young people, what we're really asking often, not always, but often what we're really asking is, how can I get young people to do what I want them to do, when I want them to do it, and how I want them to do it? And so it's not so much about engaging, it's about how do I get them to follow my directions, how do I get them to do what it is I want them to do. This is that gets us into thinking about carrots and sticks. How do I reward them? How do I reward behaviors that I want to continue? How do I punish or use things to discourage behaviors that I don't want to see continuing? There's research, however, that's been done, and it was chronicled in a great book by Dan Pink called Drive, that looks at this idea of carrots and sticks and how people are really motivated. And what they found is that that notion of punishment and reward, where we reward people for certain behaviors and we punish them for other kinds of behaviors, is really based on a kind of a 20th century idea of how people operate and what motivates them. And through research, what they found is punishments and rewards actually only work for repetitive, simple tasks that require people to do rudimentary thinking. So basically, if you want somebody to work on an assembly line and they don't have to do a lot of thinking, it's a very highly controlled kind of environment with a lot of routine, rewards and punishments can work very well. However, what they've also found is that there are a lot of negative impacts in terms of using reward and punishment. The biggest thing is that it really diminishes people's their internal motivation to do things. They start thinking that something that maybe would have been rewarding isn't rewarding anymore unless they actually get a reward for it. It also tends to lower performance, again, particularly when we start thinking about the kinds of activities that most people need to do, where you have to be more creative, where you're problem solving and troubleshooting and all of that. It tends to lead to less creativity. It often, using rewards and punishments can actually, quote unquote, crowd out the good behavior, because what happens is people are getting very focused on what incentive am I going to get to do this thing, am I going to be punished for doing this thing, and they're not really looking at what they need to be doing. Rewards and punishments also narrow people's focus, and they restrict their sense of what are the possibilities that are out there. It gets them very, in a very kind of tunnel vision sort of place. It can lead to unethical behavior, cheating, in order to get to the reward. It also can lead to addictions to getting those rewards, where that's one of the things behind gambling, for example. If I'm winning, then I get a little dopamine hit and I'm addicted to that. And finally, rewards and punishments lead people to be much more focused on the short term rather than on longer term thinking and planning. So if we want to think about 21st century motivation and what it takes to motivate people to want to do things that aren't just these simple repetitive tasks, there are three things that they found really inspire people. The first is feeling a sense of autonomy. We all have a desire to direct our own lives, to feel like we're in charge of our own lives and the things that are going on in our lives. The second thing is a feeling of mastery. We want to feel like we're getting better at something, that we're improving, we're developing our skills, and we want it to be something that matters to us, something that's important to us. The third thing that goes into motivating people is that people really want to feel a sense of purpose. We have a yearning to do whatever it is we do in the service of something bigger than ourselves. We don't like to work on things that seem like they're a waste of time, that we don't see as being connected to some larger purpose for ourselves. And so what I want to talk about is then looking at each of these individual pieces. How can we start to support and think about autonomy, mastery, and purpose in our work with students? How can we support that? So first, let's think about autonomy. And when we're looking at autonomy, the kinds of places where people want to feel that independence, that sense of control, are, first of all, they want to have control over the time when they're doing something. They want to have control over the technique. That is, how are they doing something? How are they doing the work? They like to have control over their team. Who are they working with? Are they working with people, you know, they respect and that they enjoy being around? And finally, they look for autonomy in terms of the task. What do they do? So when we think about this in the classroom, there's some things, some ways that we could start to integrate that into our work. So for example, we might say, you know, these are the goals I have for us today, and what goals do you guys want to include in this process? Or these are some things that are fixed in our schedule. We can't control them because we have to do them at certain times, but here's some other things where we have some flexibility, and how do we want to organize our time? Another thought, you can say, these are the ideas I have for how to accomplish a particular goal. What ideas do you have for how we can do this? Maybe we should experiment with some different ways to get that task done. The idea is that we start looking for different ways that we can help young people start to feel like they have more control over their setting, over their environment, over the things that they're doing, and that we're not the ones who are always dictating that and controlling, you know, what happens, when it happens, how it happens, and so forth. The next thing I want to talk about is mastery and understanding what helps people feel a sense of mastery. What they found is, first of all, we want to look for what they call Goldilocks tasks. And by that we mean, you know, it's not too challenging, but it's challenging enough. Not too simple, not too difficult. So how can we help young people find things to work on that feel like they're in that perfect space where they feel that it's challenging but not too hard? We also have to create the right environment for them. Again, we just talked about autonomy, so how do we give them autonomy in that environment? How do we help them set clear goals? What does success look like? You know, when I finish this task, what does it look like if I'm successful with it? And also providing opportunities for feedback, so that and immediate feedback. So you really have a sense of, is this working or is it not working? If it's working, you know, I want to keep doing this. If it's not working, what do I need to do to change things up? How do I need to change things? Some other, the next thing is looking at purpose and thinking about purpose. And I really, I think this in some ways can be the most important thing that we're connecting to. So how do we help people, how do we help young people discover and connect to a larger purpose for their activities? One of the most rewarding projects I ever worked on was a project I did for Job Corps, where we put together a program that allowed young people to create their own little mini social entrepreneurship project. And so they were able to look around their communities and come up with an idea for how they could give back to their community. The kids totally loved it. We had kids who had been in foster care who worked together in a team to come up with a foster care package where they got donations from the community of like toiletries and a teddy bear and some other kinds of things that could be given to children who were removed from their homes and being sent into foster care. That really, for those kids, was their opportunity to give back in a way that was really meaningful to them. They'd had the experience. They knew the kinds of things that, you know, that children would be looking for, and they pulled that whole thing together. And it felt like such a more meaningful, you know, experience to them. So really thinking about how can we help them understand it and connect to some larger purpose. Another thing related to purpose is helping young people really think about their talents and their gifts, and how do they contribute those gifts? How do they contribute those talents in the world? I think a lot of times young people can be feeling like they don't have a lot of assets, they don't have a lot of, you know, ways to give back, and so how do we help them connect to, this is, you know, these are your gifts and this is how you can use them in the world? So for more purpose, having them really connect to giving to others in a way that feels important and relevant to them. And then also thinking about how can they consistently discover and use those through whatever they're doing in your classroom. You know, there's always somebody in a group who, you know, may be good at diffusing conflict, or there's somebody who's really artistic. So how to help them discover that gift that they have, and then find ways for them to be able to be kind of the go-to person in the classroom so that they feel that sense of purpose. Some other ideas to think about to build autonomy, mastery, and purpose in the classroom environment. Definitely including students in creating your group rules, norms, and any routine and consequences. So having social contracts, having them think about it at the beginning of their work with you. What are the things you need to feel comfortable, creative, safe, and happy in this environment? How could we create those? How can we make sure that we have those? Having them think about how can we give each other feedback to work effectively together so that we're sharing what works, what doesn't work, and so forth. Another question for them to think about is what environment helps me do my best work? And there we're talking about that physical environment. You know, what do I need? Some people like music, some people don't like music. You know, what kinds of things can we do to make the environment feel really inspiring and help me do my best work? Another way to help build autonomy, mastery, and purpose is to engage students in actually planning for projects and events and activities and everything else. A lot of times we may have lesson plans that are already figured out, and we're just kind of presenting and directing young people through those experiences, finding ways that we can engage them more and saying, look, this is what needs to get accomplished. Let's talk about how can we accomplish that. How can we plan our lives and our work together in a way that we are accomplishing that? Another way for young people to think about autonomy, mastery, and purpose is for them to reflect on what is it I want to master in our time together. And it may not be just whatever is the purpose of your program or the content of your program. There may be things that they personally want to work on. And you'll see as we go through this, some different ideas may pop up. Having them really think about, you know, this as an opportunity and how can I focus on my own learning, not just what may be, you know, the purpose of the project or the classroom that I'm in. So before we move into the engaging body, mind, and heart, Jen, I just want to take a quick break and see if there are any questions or comments or anything.
We don't have any comments right now,
Okay.
but please go ahead and send them in, everybody, if you have some. I think that you've been pretty clear, Michelle. I really like the way it's structured.
Okay. So now, and again, keeping kind of as a backdrop that idea that we want to always be thinking about how do we increase autonomy, opportunities for autonomy, mastery, and purpose. I now want to kind of take a look at how do we engage body, mind, and heart? How do we engage different aspects of ourselves as we're going through our work together? So when we talk about body, obviously we're talking about the five senses. And, you know, what's the visual, the verbal, auditory, how are you using sound, touch, and smell. And all of these things, all of our senses are how we take in information from the world, and we need to engage with our senses in ways that are going to support learning and support our success. So some of the questions I think we have to ask ourselves are, one, how do we use physical space to engage? Is our classroom environment something that feels engaging and inspiring and, you know, supportive of creativity and everything else, or not? And what do we need to do to make that physical space more engaging? How do we tap into these five senses for expression, you know, being able to express learning or information or whatever? How do we tap into it for reflection, and how do we tap into them for learning? And I'll give a few examples of what I mean in a second. Another thing I think we have to think about is how do we work with physical energy? One of the biggest challenges I think for working with young people is we're in a classroom situation and they have a lot of physical energy. So how do we work with that energy? How do we use it in a way that is engaging? So some things to think about, and there are some different ideas I think we have to look at. One is, how do we engage young people in creating a classroom space or a classroom environment that really works for them? What are the things that, where they do their best work that they need to have around them? Some different ideas. One thing I do, I teach a youth leadership academy for high school sophomores. And I bring in Play-Doh and Legos to let them play with throughout the entire Leadership Academy. They totally love it, and what it does actually is they are able to sit still a lot longer because they're making things with the Play-Doh and they're making things with the Legos and everything else. It's not, when I describe this to people, a lot of times they are imagining that it's a nightmare. It's actually the best thing that I've ever done in terms of getting kids to be able to sit still for longer periods of time and be focused and engaged. It keeps their hands busy so they're able to be focused. There are actually adults who, I've used it with adults too, and they had the same response, that it really helped them stay engaged and focused. Other things to think about, how are you using sound in your classroom? Even nature noises, which you can get, apps and Pandora and everything else that you can play on your phone, that can be very soothing, very engaging for different kinds of activities. How do you use the visual? One of the things that I do a lot with young people is look at how can you create a visual journal. They may not be happy with a lot of writing, or they may want to do minimal writing, but a lot of them love to do collage or drawing or a combination of all of those things. So how do you give them opportunities to express themselves differently? One of the things that you'll see up here is a picture of people doing these different poses. This is another physical thing to work with. They've actually done research to show that there are poses, power poses, if you will, that if people practice those for 2 minutes a day, the powerful poses, it actually increases their confidence and it increases their self-esteem. And they did it specifically with people who were going into job interviews. People did 2 minutes of power posing and then they went into a job interview. They were rated more highly than people who had not done the power poses by the interviewers. So that's another way that you could play around with the physical or do some more physical kinds of things. So that's the physical. I'm really thinking about how do we engage on a physical level with young people. Now I want to talk a little bit about the mind and a couple of things as it relates to the mind. And one is we have this, we know now that brain research has shown that our brains are very plastic. We form networks of neurons connecting to one another that are based on our experiences and what we focus on and so forth. But we can also change those networks if we focus on different things. So part of what we want to be thinking about is what are we focusing on? How are we kind of building those neural connections so that they are focusing on more positive ways of engaging with the world and learning, new kinds of skills in the world. The other thing I want to briefly bring up too is the idea of mindfulness. Google and a bunch of other companies are really starting to get into the understanding that if we are more mindful, if we are paying more attention to what are our thoughts, what are our emotions, and so forth, and we're also doing things like meditation and breathing and that kind of thing, our performance improves. There was also a study that was, or some studies that are going on where they're experimenting with mindfulness meditation in classrooms, 2 minutes of meditation in classrooms. And what they've found is it's improved student performance and focus and has helped get rid of some behavior problems as well. So how do we engage with the mind? How do we, do things that One, help us create more positive pathways. How do we calm our minds so that we're able to focus? How do we create an environment that does that? And also, how do we stimulate our minds so that we can be creative? What are things that we do to stimulate our thinking? So a couple of thoughts there. One thing I think we really need to be looking at as youth development practitioners is how we use questions. And I'm actually doing a staff development session right now, a year-long staff development thing with CareerLink staff, and we've really been looking at the issue of questions and how do we use questions with clients. One is, I think we have to look at how do we ask more questions. I find that we tend to want to be giving answers as opposed to asking a lot of questions and teaching young people about how to ask questions. And then I also think we have to think about how do we ask better questions, not questions that are, you know, trying to get at somebody's knowledge of something, although that obviously is part of the deal. But how are we asking asking deeper, more meaningful questions? Because there's a process to that, and there are things that we can do, and we can get much better information from ourselves and from each other if we change the nature of our questions. Some other things to think about with this whole issue of engaging with the mind, talking about that neuroplasticity and the idea that we can build these different networks. One of the things that they found is if we focus on more positive kinds of things, positive questions and positive experiences, that builds up that sense of possibility, the sense of things that we are able to do. So how do we use positive questions? How do we use positive experiences to help build different ways of looking at the world? Another thing and I'm going to talk more about this in a few minutes, how do we get kids being kind of more experimental? How do we have them experimenting with things and trying out new ideas and so forth? Because that's really engaging. And how do we get them to be more curious? That, I think, is one of the biggest issues that we need to be working on with young people is, you know, really developing their curiosity, because that's where innovation comes from, that's where creativity comes from. I'm curious about something, and so I'm going to pursue it. So some different ideas then are, so we have body, we have mind. Now let's talk a little bit about heart and how do we engage on that emotional level. A lot of that is about understanding, and all of us understanding, you know, who am I and what's important to me. That's how we start to engage people. And also, how are my emotions a fuel for my behavior? And when you engage people's emotions, that's really where action often takes place. I either feel very positively about something and I want to take positive action, or I feel negative and I want to take negative action. But how do I, you know, engage with and understand emotions? So how do we help young people recognize and express their emotions so that they are understanding, oh, I'm feeling irritated right now, or I'm feeling really positive about this interaction right now, and be able to recognize when they're having those feelings. How do we soothe negative, or I shouldn't even say negative emotions. How do we help young people soothe and self-soothe and soothe each other? How do we validate their emotions, and how do we inspire their emotions? A lot of times we're not going towards something, we're escaping from something. And inspiration is all about helping young people, you know, be going towards something rather than moving away from something. And then finally, how do we make it safe to express our emotions? What are structures and things that we can have in place so that it's safe for young people to talk about their emotions? Some ideas, some different ways that we can do that. One thing I've used a lot is lists, and having young people make lists of things. So, you know, 100 things that I'm afraid of right now, 100 things that I'm worried about right now, 10 things I'm grateful about right now, 100 things I'm grateful about right now. Lists can really, you know, kind of help you start to explore emotions and ideas and everything. Obviously, the arts, poetry, painting, drawing, all of those things are ways that young people can explore and experience their emotions a little bit more. You'll see in the middle of this image there's this stressful situations. That's somebody's visual journal page where they were really trying to explore and think about the fact that they wanted, fewer stressful situations and more opportunities to be an artist. And that is a way for people to be able to explore their emotions. Meditation is another, thing that can help people kind of explore or move through some emotions that they may be having. And finally, something that I think we have to really help young people look at is, what are the stories that I'm telling about a particular situation or a particular experience? Often we find that the reason that I may have a negative emotion about something, I may be angry or I may be irritated or upset or whatever, is because in my mind I'm telling myself a story about that situation. I'm telling a story about what that other person said or did and why they said or did it. And there may be an equally valid story that wouldn't cause me to have those kinds of negative emotions. So helping young people kind of think about, well, what's the story I'm telling myself about this situation, and what emotions is that causing or creating in me, and what might be a different story that might explain it in a different way. How do I look at this differently so that maybe it helps me move into a different place in terms of the emotions that I may be feeling. So before I move into structures that engage, Jenna, again, I just want to take a quick break, see if there's anything.
Yeah, there is. One of the questions was sort of like, these are great questions to ask in this last section, but how would you go about answering them? Like, is there a particular recipe it looks like that you want to create? How many of these things we want to, and by answering these questions and changing program design, will you end up with engagement? There were a couple questions, I'm blending them, but by doing these things, will kids be more engaged is the first question. And second was something about, how do I know how much of what to do?
Okay. So I think that sharing this kind of information with young people, and as we start to move into the structures and the event stuff, that will make even more sense. To me, what I would do is I would engage young people in the process of saying, look, here's some different stuff that I'd like to try, I'd like to experiment with in all of this, and let's see what happens. Let's see how we respond to all of these things. Let's see if we enjoy them or don't enjoy them, or if they help us be successful or not be successful. I think that there are lots of different ways that you could put all of this stuff together. It depends on you and kind of your approach to things. It depends on the young people that you're working with. One of the things I'm going to be talking about as a structure is the idea of experimenting. And so I think that, setting up some experiments and saying, let's try this out, let's see how this works, and what pieces are working, what pieces are not working, that, is how you build the engagement.
Great.
Now, and I'm sorry, what was the second question? How do you know how much of anything to do?
Yeah.
Well, same answer.
Yeah. You've answered
never know how much of anything.
But yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, you don't necessarily know how much of anything to do. I'll give you I gave the example earlier of the Play-Doh thing. The first year that I did that, I thought to myself, I'm going to bring Play-Doh and Legos in, and I'm going to see how this goes. I'm going to see what happens, with the kids when I do this. And there was a part of me that was like, oh my God, there's going to be Play-Doh everywhere, and they're going to be throwing the Legos at each other, whatever. None of that happened. So then the next, and at the end of the session, we always ask them, what did you like best? What did you like least? Without fail, every year I've done it, and I've been doing it now 6 years, every year they say their favorite thing is the Play-Doh and the Legos. And so, we've done all this other stuff, but that's their favorite thing. They take Play-Doh back. They're always saying to me, why can't we have Play-Doh in school? But my point is that you have to try it out, see how they respond, and go from there.
Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's talk about some different structures that engage and how we can, and by structures I mean, I think there are certain frameworks that we can think about hanging some different things on. And so I want to encourage us to experiment with some of these different structures. So the first structure are, what are the rituals that we have in place? Now, a lot of times we talk about rituals, we really call them routines. What classroom routine do I have? What program routine do I have? I don't personally care for the term routine because that automatically makes me think I'm going on automatic pilot. And a ritual to me is something where there's more presence, it's more intentional. There's some quality to that, and I think we need to think about the things that we're doing in our classes in terms of that ritual quality, where it makes people more present, it makes people more engaged. If you're doing it on automatic pilot, then you shouldn't be doing it because it's not serving its purpose anymore. So I think that we have to think about rituals in some particular places. One is the idea of beginnings. And in fact, you'll see that the first Try It Tuesday that we have is on great beginnings. How do we start our programs when kids first enroll and they come into the classroom and they're working with us? What's going on in terms of those kinds of beginnings? But also, how do we begin each day? How do we begin each week? What are we doing in terms of beginnings? I also think we look at, what rituals do we have around impactful endings? What do we, we're mourning the loss of something at the end. How do we acknowledge that? What ritual do we have to celebrate things? What rituals do we have to help people kind of think about how do I want to maintain connections moving forward? There are lots of things that we can think about that make the closing, the ending of things where we're both acknowledging any sadness that we may have and also thinking about, oh, this is a new beginning. I think we need rituals that help people reflect and think about, what am I learning, what am I experiencing, what is important to me in all that we're doing. I find that there's a lot of acting, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. But we're not taking a step back necessarily and saying, okay, as a result of that experience, how did I feel? What did I learn about myself? What did I learn about other people? We have to build that more intentional reflection into the process. And again, I just mentioned this, I think we really do have to think about what are daily rituals, what are weekly rituals, in addition to what do we do to start the program and what do we do to end the program. Now, a couple of different ideas for rituals that I have used and found to be successful. One is a ritual of ending each day with a one-sentence journal. And it would be, you can actually get a journal and each page could be one sentence, or you could have, multiple sentences on the page. But the one sentence response is, what's something I learned about myself today, or what's the thing I'm most proud of myself for today? There are a million questions that you could ask as journal prompts, but then they write one sentence, and that becomes kind of that closing ritual for how do we end the day. Another ritual to look at is 2-minute meditations, where you are pausing at different points during the day. It might be at the beginning of the day and the end of the day, and maybe somewhere in the middle, and doing a 2-minute meditation. We actually, on the blog, I'm sharing some ideas or some links to actual meditations that you may want to try out. But that just gives you an opportunity to kind of refocus and get present back into your body, and then you move on to the next thing. Another idea is to use a 3-minute free write. I do this with a lot of the classes that I teach, and when I forget to do it, they complain. When we first come into the session, I will play music with no words, so some kind of instrumental music or nature sounds, and I give them 3 minutes where they are just writing everything that is on their mind, everything that they're thinking about, worried about. I have a million things on my to-do list, whatever it is, they're just writing it. And at the end of the 3 minutes, they ball it up and we throw it away. And that is symbolic of, okay, I got all of that stuff out of my head. Now I can be present and focused on what it is that we're, doing in the classroom right now. So that could be a helpful thing to do maybe at the beginning of the day. It could also be something to do when they come back from lunch, as a way to kind of get refocused and back in the room, because maybe some things happen during lunchtime or whatever. Another idea is to do a 15-minute weekly assessment, where you are either having them respond to these questions for themselves, or you're talking about them as a group, but what's working well that we want to build on for next week. What changes could we make, no matter how small, to make this experience that we're going through together more effective or more enjoyable? Another question, what did I handle particularly well this week, and what made it successful, and how can I apply that going forward? Taking those few minutes at the end of the week to really think about this is what went great, this is what's feeling really good, let's build on that for the next week. It can be really powerful. So that was the idea of rituals as structure. Another type of structure that I think we really want to look at including is experiment, and how do we become more experimental. My experience with young people is that they see adults as somehow always having their act together. Very rarely do we show them that there's a whole bunch of mess and a whole bunch of stuff going on behind the scenes. And experiments really encourage people to take risks and to try things out, and it doesn't have to be perfect and it doesn't have to work out. I'm experimenting. I'm trying something out. So experiments really start with a compelling idea or question. What is something that they want to try out, something that they want to learn more about, something that they want to do? It has to come from that more emotional space, or else you're not going to really be committed to following through on the experiment. Then you're taking some kind of action to test that idea or test the question. You observe what happens as a result of the action that you take. You're reflecting on what happens as a result of that and thinking, what does this teach me about me? What does it teach me about the situation? Then you refine, you make changes, based on that observation, and then you start all over again. Let me give you some examples of some things where young people could be doing experiments. And for that matter, all of this stuff, I would say we need to be doing as well. We can model all of this, and it can be really helpful for us to learn about our own practice. So one way to, or one type of experiment to do is to track emotions. And in particular, what you can do is stop at certain times during a day and have someone, you look at yourself and you say, what am I feeling right now? What's my, am I angry? Am I feeling good? What's going on right now? And what has happened around that is contributing to my emotion? This starts to have people understanding, oh, these are the kinds of activities where I feel good and involved and engaged, and so I want to do more of that. And these are the kinds of activities or experiences that make me feel bad about myself or angry or whatever. And you can really experiment with that and kind of see, what happens when I pay attention to my emotions. What do I learn about myself? Another thing, obviously, is you can try out a new habit. I mentioned the idea of, some of these rituals where you do a 2-minute meditation or a 3-minute free write. That becomes something that you're experimenting with, and you're not saying this is some permanent thing that we're doing forever. You're saying, okay, let's try this out for a week or 2 weeks or 30 days. Let's see what happens as a result of us experimenting with that. Another thing is to look at how are you implementing values. So having young people kind of look at what's important to them, and then how are they living their lives? What actions are they taking that are in accordance or in alignment with what they feel is important to them in their lives? So they can experiment with, making sure that they're kind of taking a look at each day, what's important to me, and am I doing things that feed that thing that's important to me? And then another thing I'll share this article on the blog. There's this great article, 106 Tips for Master Connectors, and it has all of these different ideas for how you can build a quality network. that would be a great thing for young people to experiment with, doing some of those different activities and seeing what happens as a result. So those are some examples of some different kinds of experiments. That's another structure. A third structure I think we really need to look at is our conversations and the quality of conversations, and how we're using conversation, not lecture, not instruction, but conversation to help people, help young people connect and learn and so forth. Even in the workplace, what I have found repeatedly with people is they will say, I've learned more from a conversation with someone than I learned from a training I went to. So how are we using conversation more effectively? What makes conversations compelling is, first of all, you're really focusing on some authentic, important questions. I think, for example, of having a conversation with young people about when do I feel like I'm being my best self, and how can I bring more of that into my life? That could be a very compelling kind of question. Talking to young people to say to them what's, an important, compelling question to you. It has to feel real. It has to feel authentic. It can't be something that an adult told you have to talk about. Another thing that can make conversations compelling is the removing tables. There's the idea of you can do knee to knee, where people, if you're talking in a pair, people are actually close enough together that their knees are touching, or doing circles of conversation. There's a lot of work out there. There's a great book called The Circle Way that really talks about how we structure the physical space of a conversation has a huge impact on the quality of that conversation. And when we have tables, that automatically creates barriers between people. And so how do we remove some of those barriers? Obviously, you have to listen in a conversation, but it needs to be listening to understand the other person's perspective, not waiting for the person to stop talking so I can now put in my opinion. Another quality of compelling conversations is that you're really speaking from the heart. And sometimes it takes time to be able to get to the place where young people will feel comfortable speaking from their heart. But I have personally found that the more I speak from my own heart, and the more I am being authentic with young people, the more likely they are to meet me in the same place. Last thing, I think, is really looking at how can we connect to multiple perspectives and in authentic conversation. In the Leadership Academy that I teach in Delaware County, one of the things that we do is bring young people, or bring leaders from the community in to do speed networking with the young people. The kids are the ones who drive the questions, who ask the questions, and it's treated as a conversation. And inevitably what happens is because they've had a chance to engage with these adults that they wouldn't normally meet, and engage with them in an authentic way, they have a totally different understanding of their experiences. I was telling Jen before we came online for this session that what they always end up saying to me is that their belief before they did these conversations was that adults always had like a straight line in their career. They knew exactly what they wanted to do and they went directly to it. And by having these kinds of conversations, what they recognize is adults are as clueless as the kids are. And that makes the kids feel a lot better because they feel like they don't have to make decisions when they're 15 years old that are going to impact them, for the rest of their life. Like you can't change or whatever. And it really kind of unlocks some things for them. And so having that chance to talk to people that you wouldn't normally come into contact with, that also adds to making things more compelling. I'll take a quick break. I know we're kind of in the middle still of the structures. And also, Jen, can you give me a time check? Because I can't see my time right now.
Sure. It's about 1:50.
Oh, okay. We need to go fast. All right, so another structure is to think about how can we incorporate design thinking into the process. And there are 5 steps in being a design thinker. And we actually have information on the Studio E website that I've also linked to on the blog that we're going to be using. And that kind of walks you through a design process. But that's something that you can really think about. How do I incorporate design thinking into my individual interactions with young people, into the classroom, into being a design thinker for the program, as well as for, how do we, as an organization, incorporate design thinking. That becomes a very different way of approaching problems that can be really effective in engaging with young people. Another thing is, how do we incorporate technology and social media into what we're doing? My belief is we have to learn to work with the tech, not against it. They all have cell phones. How do we work with it? There are lots of ways that you can use technology to have conversations, collect feedback, to tell stories, and to share and to model use of technology. A couple of options that you may want to think about. We're using Hangouts right now, and Hangouts on Air in particular, where you can do video conferencing, but you can use Hangouts to do virtual interviews and panel discussions with people that you are not physically in our location. So you could talk to somebody from around the world using technology, and wow, what a great way to get a different perspective by talking to people in other countries. You can use it to do virtual tours, virtual workplace tours, because you can actually use an iPad and have somebody walk around, or use their iPhone or Droid to give a virtual tour. And of course, young people could broadcast their own events and activities, so they could actually do their own talk show or whatever it is that they wanted to do using Hangouts or Hangouts on Air. Another tool for you to check out, there's an app called Nearpod. There's a free version of it, and then there are paid versions, but it basically lets you be able to create interactive multimedia presentations that young people can then connect to through other computers, through their iPhone, through an iPad, or whatever. And you're able to do all kinds of stuff like quiz them, do polls, share videos. It really is kind of a cool little interface for you to check out. Another one is Class Pager, which is similar to Nearpod, but a little bit different and not quite as extensive. You can use it to run polls, so you could actually, set up polls to ask questions of young people that they can answer either in class or outside of class. You can send text reminders about homework changes or schedule changes, or check out this thing that's on TV, or whatever. It's a really cool thing. The best thing about it is that you don't have to actually share anybody's phone number. Like going through Class Pager, nobody can see anybody else's cell phone number, including you, and they won't see your cell phone number. So those are some of the structures. Let me just stop, see if there are any questions before we head into the home stretch on events and activities.
No, just a couple comments that the Nearpod and Class Pager things are pretty cool.
Oh, okay, good. So check those out. All right, so let's talk about some different events and activities that can engage. This is an idea, a fail fair. This is an idea that has developed in some nonprofit areas, as a matter of fact. But the idea is that we start learning from and celebrating some failures. And so you can set up an actual fail fair. And what you do is people would talk about some failure, something that didn't work well for them. They do a 7-minute explanation, or up to 7 minutes, of what the situation was, who was involved, how it failed or didn't go as they wanted. You can use first names only if you want. The rule is no recording. This is actually just, a conversation, because people want to feel safe in talking about their failure. There's also no blame. This isn't about, well, whose fault was it, or that kind of thing. It's really about learning from failure. So the person who presents or talks about their failure then has a one question for the audience, where they're asking the audience, to give them their feedback on the failure. And the idea is really to invite that audience participation. I think that could be a really interesting thing to do with young people. We like to talk a lot about success stories, and here's the success story. But how about, this is something, a place where I felt like I didn't make progress, or I failed, or whatever, and this is what I learned from it, and this is what I could do moving forward. That could be really valuable and helpful to young people. Another type of activity that you could try out, or event you could try out, is Ignite. And I do this now every year. I started doing this 3 years ago with the Youth Leadership Academy. Basically, it is they do 20 PowerPoint slides. It's a presentation, 20 PowerPoint slides, 15 to 20 seconds per slide. You can decide which you want, if it's 15 or 20 seconds, and they auto forward. So when you do an Ignite presentation, you have to, basically keep up with the slides, because they keep going forward. It starts with some kind of compelling idea or question or story. So you can talk about, what are you passionate about. When we do Ignite with the Leadership Academy, we have them do, what is leadership to me. And so they do an Ignite presentation on what does leadership mean to them. But it could also be, some great story. You could have kids telling a story around a particular topic or theme. They are encouraged to be visual. They actually, it's discouraged to have bullet points like I'm doing in here. Most of your slides should be visual, photos and that kind of thing. The slides auto advance, as I said. You definitely have to rehearse, because you have to keep up with the timing as you go through, but it's really a fun way for young people to share information. They get competitive with it a little bit. We had been giving out prizes and decided not to do that. But they really have fun, and they're entertaining, and a great way to, and you could use an Ignite for, this is what I've decided to do for my career, and this is why, or this is, why I love, the work that I'm doing right now, or whatever. You could brainstorm with them about what would be a good question to ask, but it's a fun structure to use. Another thing to try out are walls, and you can do like a quote wall. I suggest working with young people to identify kind of what theme you want to use, but basically you would set up a space and have them use sticky notes and colored markers, and then they can do quotes, drawings, my best advice, my worst experience, whatever. I would then that you can take pictures of those and be able to post those on social media if you're using social media. But that becomes kind of a documentation of an experience, or it can be a way, this is what I'm learning this week, or this is how I feel about this topic, or whatever. So those can be fun, kind of engaging things to do with young people. Another idea is hidden fortunes. And this is where you can get little slips of paper and have students write on those slips of paper quotes or questions or words of advice or words of encouragement or whatever, and then you hide them around the building. They can put them in books, they can put them in the classroom, and so forth. The idea being that people would find those later, and it's kind of a little inspirational kind of thing. I've had fun doing it with kids where it was like it's basically we're going to inspire someone, paying it forward, inspiring someone. Maybe they're going to pick that up at a point when they're feeling really down about their life or whatever, and then they're going to see this quote, and it'll make them feel good. So that's another kind of fun thing that you can do. The last event or activity, and I know I'm rushing through these pretty quickly, is the idea of doing an unconference. And we do conferences a lot, but that's where many things have already been figured out way in advance. They tend to not be very focused on conversation or anything like that. But an unconference is sort of the opposite of a conference. The focus is definitely on conversations as opposed to presentations. You can have a little bit of presentation in there, but it's really creating a venue for people to have conversations. One of the things that we talk about with an unconference is the law of 2 feet, which means that nobody has to feel like they have to stay at anything where they're not getting something from it. They can move to another session without having to feel like they're, they shouldn't have done that they shouldn't have left. An unconference agenda is actually collaboratively developed with the people who attend. And it happens at the start of the conference. So the first activity at an unconference is for everybody to get together and you're collaboratively developing an agenda. There's a process to that, but it's pretty easy to implement. Then you would have maybe 3 or 4 rounds of sessions that people would attend, and then there's some kind of closing. What did we learn? Or what next steps do we want to take? Depends on the nature of the unconference that you are running. Some different session formats that you can use. Obviously, kind of a how-to can work really well. So this is how you do X, and letting people do that. My big or little question. So sometimes people have questions or an issue that they would like to engage other people in talking about, and so that becomes the conference, or that conference session is, I want to talk about this question. Who else is interested in talking about this question or this issue? And that, come talk about it, which is related to, let's talk about X. Another thing to do is an unpanel, which is actually the fishbowl setup. Some of us may be familiar with that, where you have the speakers, the people who are going to be doing the talking in the middle, and then everybody is sitting in concentric circles around them. So the conversation is happening in the middle as opposed to, being in lines and rows. It's interesting. You get kind of a different dynamic in switching that. You can do speed demos where you would have different tables or different things set up where somebody's going to do a quick demo of a product or how to do something or whatever, but people then move around to the next one as soon as that demo is over. You can do World Cafe. There's a whole structure to a World Cafe kind of thing. Appreciative inquiry is really thinking about what's working. What are we doing well, and how can we build on more of that? And you can do it related to some specific topics. And then the last idea for an unconference is the idea of open awards, where you would actually have awards that maybe you wanted to give to people, but you put them in the center of the room during the closing, and then attendees are able to go up and pick up an award and say, I want to give this award to so-and-so because of, what they did in their presentation, or because I had such a great conversation with them, or whatever. The idea is that the participants are giving out the awards based on their experiences as they went through the unconference. So those are some ideas for some different kinds of events or activities. You can do mini versions of these, or big versions of these. What's next then, as we kind of look at moving forward over the next 10 weeks? Here's the URL for the blog. It's engagepyn.blogspot.com. And over the course of the next 10 weeks, we're going to be adding to that. Right now we have our first Try It Tuesday is up there. That's all focused on great beginnings. We also are going to be putting this presentation and the slides and some follow-up resources onto the blog as well. We really encourage you to check it out and to sign up. You can get email notification for each of the Try It Tuesdays. And we ask you to, try out these different activities with your students. You can comment on the blog post to give us feedback and let us know how things went, or if you have questions. You can also share your own adaptations to the exercises, or maybe your own resources. This first week we're focusing on great beginnings. So if you have a great beginning that you've used, by all means, please share it with us so that others can see it. We also do have a form. If you don't want to leave a comment in comments, we have a form on that blog as well that you can fill out. It will email to me, and then I can put that information on the blog. So we hope that these give you some ideas, some things that you could try out or experiment with. We really would love to keep engaged with you guys with all of this stuff as a conversation. How are things working? What goes on in your classrooms and your experiments? Where are you running into problems? We want to kind of create a community around this and be able to help each other as you go through the summer and even into the school year and starting with new programs. So Jen, I will ask if we have any questions.
We don't have any final questions. Thank you.
Okay.
You've done a great job. Fantastic resources. Thank you.
So I'm stopping the screen share. Okay, well, so that's it.
Thank you.
All right. So thanks, everyone. We hope that you are able to, join us and continue talking with us, because this is, for me, this is a great topic. I love this topic.
Absolutely.
So, all right. Thank you.